Get going, Sally.
Okay. Well, greetings, everyone, and thank you so much for gathering with me for a conversation about remarkable people. Most of you have sat here already, and maybe you were thinking then, as I am now, how can I pass myself off as remarkable? That's a very daunting thought. And on top of that, I grew up with a mother who had impeccable manners. And one of the things she instructed me as I grew older was, Sally, a lady doesn't talk about herself. So there are the lessons that went behind me. So Mom, wherever you are, just plug your ears for 30 minutes because I'm about to disavow your orders to me.
Good.
At any rate, I've attempted to put a story together. I was born and raised on the East Coast, and I still think of myself as an Easterner. We lived on the top of a curvy, hilly road, and I remember many winters getting on sleds and zooming down the road as fast as we could. And it wasn't against house rules to crash into somebody and call it a friendly nudge.
Oh, no.
I still get a lump in my throat when I see photos of snowy New England days. But actually, this wasn't really New England. This was Chappaqua, New York. In those days, Chappaqua, New York was a one-horse town. But you probably remember that when Hillary Clinton decided to run for senator from New York, she bought a house in Chappaqua. And where, people ask? Nobody had heard of it, but now they have. And I haven't been back since she bought property there, so I really don't have any idea. I know sort of where it is just because somebody told me, but anyway, and as far as I know, she's still there, and I guess Bill comes there from time to time too. Chappaqua was rural. It was a Republican town in those days, and we kids knew that Republicans and Democrats were parties, but for some reason we probably didn't understand very well, you could only be part of one. You couldn't be part of both. And still, it was pretty benign, sort of like rooting for a team, not so much like today. I've not been back in many years, but what my guess is that it has slowly morphed into a Democratic town and much bigger and much more built out than it was when I was there. We all, from K through 12, we all went to school in the same building, which was kind of neat. Although I remember being terrified when I was awfully young of the big kids who would bust in line in front of me in the cafeteria. I never protested, though. I was the second born child. My brother was named Donald for his father, who had been named Donald for his father. But my parents decided to call my brother Sandy, which was the color of his hair. So when I came along a couple of years later, the name Sally popped into my mother's head. This is what she told me later. It goes so nicely with Sandy, she said. So we grew up as Sandy and Sally. And interestingly, Sandy married one of my high school friends. And we all stayed friends, and we still are, 3 generations later, which is really special. Except for Sandy, who, alas, died of lung cancer 10 years ago. Tobacco did.
Dan, you need to turn off your audio. Excuse me.
It was protesting the cancer, probably. Tobacco did its dirty deed, and I still miss him. Our childhood was undramatic. We had good parents who cared for us both. They weren't extravagant, but we really had whatever we wanted and needed, and plenty of opportunities to be involved in sports and the arts if we wanted. I was drawn much more to arts. I was never an athlete, but I did love the arts. Their outlook on life, including the Episcopal Church and the Republican Party, were what I knew. It seemed fine to me, although as I grew older, I became aware of an underclass that troubled me. And I remember taking the train with my mother into New York City, and before you go into Grand Central under the tunnel, there were rows and rows and rows and rows of very shabby, rundown houses, and I could see people in them and around them. And I was very puzzled. How did I land where I did? And how did these people land where they did? And I didn't think anything beyond that. It just obviously made an impact on me because all these decades later, it's still, I still have a very, very vivid memory of seeing those houses. But then I went off to college. And in the late 50s, I went to Smith College in Western Massachusetts. And I got immediately wrapped up in studies of history, religion, and literature. It was a lot of work, but I plugged away and I loved the ideas that I was exposed to. It was just really very, very exciting time. And people always talk about how college students have late night conversations. And we did, but ours were about sex and religion, never politics. And politics was a minor subject in those days, even a little boring, but hardly ever angry or confrontational. And in those days, it was left unquestioningly to males. It never occurred to any of us, I don't think, that we would be, that we would enter politics. Things have changed a lot. Interestingly, my senior year, I saw Nixon and Kennedy running for president. And what's interesting about that, and I don't know if you may be fully aware of this, they were very good friends. In the Senate, they always rapped and they would have lunch together and talk about sports and family, and they were good pals. And it was only, even though they might have sat, in different sections of the Senate, but things were so different then. And then it was only when they began to compete for president that they became rivals. But what was so interesting to me is that my senior year, there was a straw poll on campus. Who do you support? Who will you vote for, or who would you vote for if you were old enough? And a lot of us, of course, weren't. And then there were two buckets, and the faculty bucket went here, the faculty answers went here, and the student answers went in this bucket. And this probably won't surprise you. Maybe I should ask you what you think was the result. But it went 90%, 90%. Any ideas which side would have gone which way?
Students for...
Because I'll tell you. The faculty voted 90% for Kennedy. And the students voted 90% for Nixon. And the faculty were shaking their heads and saying they're just voting their parents' vote, and their parents are voting their stock portfolio. I have no idea what a stock portfolio was in those days, but I sure did vote my parents' vote. We thought we said in our sort of snide way, well, they're just woolly-headed and they are not practical. And I have subsequently asked people, of my generation who would have voted in that time, who did you vote for? And the answer is often Nixon. And I would then say, well, who would you vote for? Would you vote for him today? Oh, no, never. So there's just been a sea change in how people have thought. And of course, Smith, I always used to say it was under the umbrella of Queen Victoria when I was there. But it wasn't too long after that the Smith students, instead of going off to the Bahamas or something during the mid-year break, went up to New Hampshire to support one of the liberal Democratic contenders for president. I'm embarrassed to say, and that was after I had left, but I just was so interested in that. I thought it was just so interesting that it only took about 4 or 5 years for that sea change to happen. Yes. one of the bits of advice that Jim gave me when we discussed my talk tonight was to think of an important decision that changed the direction of my life. Well, we make decisions every day, and most of them are pretty minor. And so I had to think what really changed my life. And my life was so straightforward for so many years. I went through school and I knew I'd finish school and graduate and go to college and graduate and maybe get a job. I didn't think in those days about career. And then I thought I'd probably have a husband and kids, and that's very straightforward life. And it pretty much happened. But I have to say that, and this maybe sounds kind of old-fashioned, but the thing that changed my life, but it really didn't change it. It just kind of reaffirmed the direction I was going, was by marrying Steve. And Steve Schroeder was different from other males I had known in that he came from California. He had grown up in a very progressive family, and not religious. His father was a Lutheran German, like Schroeder, and his mother was Jewish. And his father actually was a member of the Communist Party. And so this was how Steve had grown up. And we used to date, and we had a restaurant in Boston that we loved to go to, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was in the Little Italy section, and it was a very small restaurant, and they served pizza, and they served Chianti in Coke bottles because they didn't have a liquor license. And so that was just our favorite place to go, and we would just sit and talk for hours about our early years, and we'd talk about politics. And I just was so leaning in this direction of moving from conservative to liberal that it was just kind of a very, very fun time. And so it took a couple of years. Steve was at that point an intern, I think, or resident, and we decided to, one thing I put in here, I forgot about this. Well, I think I'll skip it. I'll tell you later. But anyway, we decided we'd get married. And Steve was headed for Atlanta. And he was going to be working for the CDC for a couple of years. And that was in place of his draft requirement. And we were going to get married in the middle of that time. And CDC, you probably know very well what it is. In those days, it was called the Communicable Disease Center. Now it's called the Center for Disease Control. I think I've got that right. And so the focus is a little different, but that's what he was doing. And here was a surprise. After we got married and I came down and I settled into our little bird's nest of a treehouse of an apartment, and Steve announced that he was going to the Unitarian Church. And I said, why? Because he had never gone to church before, or actually since. And he said, well, the Vietnam War is really bothering me, and I just can't seem to talk to anyone around here. Everybody is worried about the domino theory, and the whole world is going to fall if Vietnam falls, and so on and so on and so on. So somebody had suggested, well, you should go to the Unitarian Church because they just really talk things out, and you can say whatever you want and people will love you for it. So he had done that, and he found it was just very much like that. So I said, sure, I was game. And so the two of us went for the rest of the year, and it was a very, very nice experience. And one of the things I was thinking about today is that made it so special was that one of the members was a cellist from the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. And this man would perform for us probably every other Sunday. And so I just thought, this is remarkable that we have this professional musician playing for us just because we walked in the doors of this church. And so we then left Atlanta. Oh, I should tell you a couple of other things about Atlanta. One was that I had been teaching fifth grade in a little town outside of Boston, and it was just a wonderful school, and the kids were great, and it was easy, and so on and so on. When I got to Atlanta, it was October, and October is a good time to get a teaching job. That sounds surprising, but somebody has always quit and just got their job and discovered they hated it and left. And in my case, my predecessor had died. And so she had left a class that was really at 6s and 7s. It was the principal had told me, we are so modern. We have a 1-2 combination class, and that's the class you're going to have. Well, what they had done was they had too many kindergartners and too many first graders. So they took part of each class and put them together. Only it was the top kindergartners and the bottom first graders. And the kindergartners, of course, learned how to read in a heartbeat. And those poor little ones that had just flunked first grade already were still struggling at putting letters into words by the end of the year. It was just quite an amazing time for me. But anyway, it was an interesting year. The schools in that area were all segregated, and but a state law had been passed that they had to be integrated. And so our school was going to be integrated the following year. And people were just really apprehensive about this. And because we left, I never really found out how it went. But I do remember talking with the children about it, and they were quite interested in what this was going to be like. I didn't find them condemning or angry or any of those things. So I'm hoping that it worked out all right. And then, but I did discover 2 other Unitarian churches before I found Marin. One was in Bethesda, Maryland. When we were in Washington, D.C. for a while, but we lived in Bethesda, and that was a wonderful experience. Steve had been invited to be in a touch football group every Sunday morning, and I had 2 little children, I don't know what age, 3 and 4, I think, and I took them and plunked them in the Sunday school and had this glorious hour of just being part of the service. It was great. And then we lived in New Jersey, and I attended the Princeton Unitarian Church, and that was the one where I really learned about Unitarianism and what it was. And the one other thing to tell you about Atlanta when we were there is that during our time there, we lost 2 wonderful human beings, Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. They were both assassinated. And so I still, that's a big part of my memory of that year. Well, on to the rest of the story. Music has always been part of my life, and I remember when I was very, very little, hearing my father play the violin. He was not great, but he was not too bad, and he would play the violin, and I just loved it. I just absolutely loved it, and I adored my father, so I suppose that was part of it. But I do remember just loving that sound, and I did take up the violin 40 years later. After my father died, I was cleaning up his apartment, cleaning it out, and I came across this violin and lots of music. And I thought, oh, darn, I've always wanted to learn how to play this. So I took it back. I had a neighbor who played the violin, not particularly well, but well enough to show me the ropes. And I called her up and I asked her if she would help me learn how the thing worked. And she said, sure. And she said, I have a quid pro quo. I want to learn how to play tennis. So every Monday morning, I would go to her house and we'd have a violin lesson, and then I'd put the violin away and we'd get out our tennis rackets and we'd go down to the tennis courts and we'd hit some balls, and neither one of us was very good. But anyway, we had fun, and then I'm sure we must have gone out for lunch after that. And so that was with the violin, I stuck with it for about 18 years. And I never got as good as I hoped I would. And I think the reason I stopped was because I realized that to get to that point, I'd have to spend a whole lot of time practicing. And I was already at a disadvantage because I hadn't played as a child. So I didn't have the nimble fingers that people have. But it was just a very fun time. And I loved playing. I played with several different chamber groups, and we'd go to somebody's house and sit in the kitchen, and 4 stands and 4 chairs, and people would bring music and we would play for ourselves. That was it. And so it was a good experience. But when I got old enough, I took piano lessons as a young, as a first grader. I think I started. And in 4th grade, we were all brought to the auditorium, I think maybe just 4th graders, and we were told that we were old enough to play a band instrument if we'd like. And so they demonstrated all the instruments to us and said that if anybody wanted to learn how to play it, they had them. We could just use the school instruments and they would teach us. So I just fell in love with the sound of the clarinet. And I signed on to that, and I had a lesson. I mean, it wasn't a private one, but it was, I learned how to play it. It's not too hard to learn. And I already played the piano, so I knew how to read music. And then we started being drafted for football games, the band. And we'd have to play in these intermission gigs. And I hated marching. And one of my worst memories, it seems funny now, but at the time it was very humiliating, was that, and anybody who knows me knows that I have a terrible sense of direction. If you've ever hiked with me or driven with me, I'm just as likely to take the wrong turn as the right turn. Yeah. Well, one day we were marching, and I somehow found myself, or I knew I was there, but in the part of the formation where I had to lead off for something. And I was concentrating so hard. And I did lead off, but the trouble was I went the wrong way. And about 3 or 4 band members followed me. And it must have looked awfully funny because 4 of us were marching south on the field and everybody else was marching north on the field. And I have blotted out from my memory everything that happened after that until I got home in tears and told my parents what had happened. But the only upshot of that was that I was forever relieved of having to lead a formation. And everybody was relieved about that, but especially me. So then during the 60s, I got drawn to the folk tune genre. I loved all the songs, and so I got a guitar and learned how to play it. And 60s were great in a lot of ways, and one of the ways was that everybody loved to sing. And I lived in a house with, I think I had met Steve by now, but I was still living in a house with a lot of females outside of Boston and Cambridge. And I think we must have had at least a couple of parties every week. And I would always have my guitar at the ready, and people were always ready to sing. And we sang the songs that you all remember from the 60s. And they were pretty easy to sing and pretty easy to accompany. And so that was what I did for a few years. And then I actually taught music. I used to sing with my school kids. I was teaching 5th grade then, and the kids loved to sing. I remember my class, their favorite song was Charlie and the MTA. Do you remember that? And we used to make up other words about it. And then, let's see, what was I going to tell you next?
Sally, we only have like 10 or 15 minutes left. So
Okay, and I'm on page 5 of 5, so we're good.
Well, you haven't even got to California yet, for crying out loud.
Well, that's true. So I'll skip to California. We lived Steve and I got married. We lived in Bethesda, Maryland. Steve was working at the CDC, but he had his eye on something at UCSF out here and had been raised in the Bay Area, so he was very anxious to come back, and I thought it seemed like a pretty nice idea. And one week, he was gone for a few days, and he came back one night, and he walked in the door, and he sat me down, and he said, "How would you like to move to San Francisco?" Well, that was preordained because it was March, and it was slushy and sleeting, and the children were passing colds back and forth, and I was buckling and unbuckling boots, and I said, "When?" And my image was that it always was sunny and warm in California. That was the image I had. So that was March, and we left in June, and I felt a little like the Jodes heading west. And if we had only had a couple of frying pans and pots on the side of our car, it would have been even more authentic. But we drove across the country in about a week or 10 days, and it was good fun. And we got to California, and kids entered school. I guess that was how I got into teaching music, because at that time, they had lost their music program altogether, and they were begging for volunteers. So I did that for a while. And so that was, and then I found I didn't find the Unitarian Church then. I didn't go anywhere. None of us did. And it was only when we went back to Princeton in November, in the decade of the 90s, that I found the Princeton Church, came back, and then I joined this one. But it took a while to make the transition. And so the one thing I do that's associated with music, and it has nothing to do with my making it, is that I sit on the board of the Marin Symphony. And probably some of you know that because I'm always telling you about concerts, but I do urge you to, and I would love to send you the schedule if you just send me an email, and I would send it. But they're just a fabulous orchestra, and it's easy to go there, and it's not very expensive. And so there's my push on that one. So the last thing is just about our family. We have 2 sons, David and Alan, and both of them followed their father into medicine. David is a cardiologist living in Portland with his wife and 2 daughters. And Rebecca was a teacher. I told them when they decided to go to medical school that they were not allowed to marry doctors because I didn't want to be outnumbered 5-1. And they didn't anyway. But so, and then Alan lives in Palo Alto, and he is in academic medicine, or more so clinical too, but he works at, he's on the faculty at Stanford, and they have 2 kids, a 9th grader and a 4th grader. So we have 1 grandson and 3 granddaughters. Our boys, the boys are great. I still have to pinch myself when I remember how they just never could figure out how to hang up their towels instead of throwing them on the floor. and they've become competent adults and very, very nice people. And I'm lucky. I'm lucky to have had a very good life, and with, of course, the occasional rain shower, as we all have. But I've been lucky, and I'm glad I found UU Marin and know all of you. So that's the end of my tale.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
First off, your children were born where? Here or in New Jersey or?
In the East. David was born in Boston, and Alan was born in Washington, D.C.
Oh, so you were in Boston as well.
Yeah, well, that's where it all
That's where you started.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, they're only at 16 months apart, but I was 31, I think, when the first one was born. And now that doesn't seem old, but I know that everybody I knew had gotten married and had babies ages before, so I was late for our generation.
So when you hooked up with us at UU Marin, were you living in Marin or were you still in the city at the time?
No, we had come out here before. I know it's confusing, and I kind of skipped around in time, but we had come out here in 1976, and we stayed here until 1990. And at that point, Steve was invited to head up the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in Princeton, New Jersey. And so we went back there, and we lived there for 12 years, knowing we were going to come back here after a certain amount of time. And so we just rented this house. And it was when we came back the second time that I found the UU Marin Church.
And you were living in Marin then?
The whole time. Yeah, same house. Same house
you're in now. Okay, good. Okay. Anybody else have a question? Nani, you always have a question.
Gretchen's hand is up. Or Nani, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to ask about religion in your background, your family, your present life.
Well, she said some.
Yeah, I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and actually I liked it quite a lot, and it was very important to me. But then I grew away from it. At some point, I just got interested in other things, and I grew away from it. And it was really the experience of then finding the Unitarian Church, which was very different.
Yeah.
And they spoke a different language there. They spoke a language I understood much better than the Episcopal Church. But I still, my parents, well, they're not alive anymore, but my brother and sister-in-law, well, my brother's dead now, but my sister-in-law still goes to a Episcopal church in Southern California. So when I visit her, I go with her, and I kind of like all the falderall and the people all robed up, and there's something kind of special about it, and maybe it's nostalgic, but I'm too pragmatic, I guess, to really to want that.
You have children?
I do. The two sons that I was telling you about.
Yeah. I mean, did they?
No, they're not religious.
Not okay.
Mm-mm.
And Sally, I'm sorry. I came in late. Now, how long have you been going to the UU church?
Here?
Yes.
The one here I started coming to in about 2004, I think. 2005. I can't remember the exact date, but it was around then.
Oh, we're sure glad you did.
Yeah.
Well,
Gretchen.
I have a question. Sally, I know you're an avid hiker. How did you pick that up? How have you participated over the years in your hiking, and did you do backpacking with your kids? And kind of just give us a little history about your hiking.
Well, I just, it was something I always loved. Like I said earlier, I was never an athlete, and so I never got into competitive sports. But there was something about hiking that I just loved. I love the scenery and the vegetation and the views and the feeling of it. And I also loved the workout. I always felt good after a hike that I had, kind of pushed my body and all of that. And now as I get older, I can't push my body as hard as I used to, for sure. And I'm kind of a pokey hiker, so I'm usually the last in line in a group. But it's something I love, and I guess, yeah, Linda's still here. We took a hike today. Oh my gosh, it was just incredible in Mill Valley, called the Cascade Trail. It goes to Cascade Falls. And Linda wanted to do it because she said, you've got to go to waterfalls after it rains. And you and I did something like that, Gretchen, once. And the day after a rainfall, it's just unbelievable. And this was unbelievable. It was really beautiful. If you twist Linda's arm, she might show you her pictures sometime.
And so did you ever backpack with the kids or anything like that? And Steve?
We didn't really backpack. We did some car camping, but we didn't backpack. But our older son, David, was much more of a hiker. He could just put one foot in front of the other and keep going all day till it got dark. He just kind of fit right into it. And it took Alan a little bit longer because he was much more of a competitive athlete and he found hiking a little boring. But that was, but they both hike now. I mean, it seems like that's something that people in California do.
And you also trekked in Europe or something, didn't you?
We trekked. Yeah, we did a couple of times. We went on a vacation to, first time we ever trekked was quite a few years ago. It was 1990, I think. And we went to the Himalayas.
Oh, wow.
And we trekked. We were in a group and we were very well taken care of. We hiked. We did a lot of hiking and it was all just incredibly beautiful. And we wound up at the base camp for Annapurna. And we spent 2 nights there. So the day in between, we just went up and back up to pretty high. But by then we were all more or less inured to the altitude. And then we took another hike to the Alps, the Alpine foothills. And that was also very, very fun. Yeah, Dick, did you have a question?
Yeah, to what extent have you now gotten into politics in Marin, either and Tiburon or Marin in general?
Well, that's a good question because I always feel guilty that I don't do more. We do write checks, but the main thing I have done is write postcards. I've not been part of the, infrastructure at all. I clap for people who are.
And with Steve's background, not involved with all of the changes that occurred at Marin General over the years?
Well, did you want to ask him a question about that? He's here.
Yeah, I see him over there on my screen. No, my question was, did he get involved and bring you into any of the hullabaloo around Marin General as it was changing?
So, Dick, I became a board member after it split of the hospital after it split from Sutter, and I also became a board member of the Marin Community Foundation. So I have had some local service here, and obviously our dinner table conversation gets to that. And Sally makes sure that I do the right thing.
All right.
Well, we had. I'm having a senior moment. Who was so active with the Marin General Hospital? The man who just died.
You mean as part of the church?
Yeah.
John Severinghouse.
What?
John Severinghouse.
Yes, he was the chairman of the elected board for the hospital. I'm not exactly sure what the politics of it were, but things were very nasty for a while, and now they're not.
So, Billy, what about I'm surprised that Carol isn't here tonight. But she told me all about your gardening.
Oh. Yeah, I guess it's like hiking. I love to be outside and kind of putzing around with the garden, and they're just loving all this rain. And it's, California can be daunting because you can garden all year. One thing about the East is that you stop after the first snowfall and you just don't go out again. And but here there's always something to do. And but it gets me outside, and I do enjoy it. And there are just a lot of surprises. I don't really plan very well. I just, put things in and move them around and
see what happens.
So it's
Okay.
yeah.
Any other questions out there?
Yeah. When you were at Princeton, did you know Enoch Durbin? And was he quite a character then?
Yes and yes. He was, and he died just before I left, actually.
Oh.
He was very,
I
very,
remember he had a heart attack and got on his bike and rode to the hospital.
yeah.
And he was my tennis partner at Star Island every year, which I really enjoyed.
Ah,
And Enoch had a daughter who went to UCSF and is now a physician.
Oh,
how about
good.
that?
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and I don't know what's happened to his wife, Marilyn.
Oh, right.
I think she died recently.
Okay. Yeah, is that how you knew him, Jim, was from Star Island?
Yes,
Yes,
from Star Island.
And did you ever go to Star Island?
I never did, but a lot of the congregants at the Princeton church did. And
Yes.
so you probably knew them.
Posner's?
Yes, they were real neat people.
she had her experience of stuff.
One more question. Anybody?
Ed had his hand up.
Who did?
So
Okay. Where
yeah,
is-
so I was curious, you mentioned teaching a little bit, but then didn't talk about it anymore. Did you teach just 1 year, or did you teach more than that?
Oh, no, I taught for a lot of years. And then after I had kids, and we moved around a fair bit, so I did a lot of part-time teaching. And then and a lot of that was music. And then since, now I'm not in the schools at all, but I am a docent, which is very fun, and it's teaching. And I used to be a docent at UC Berkeley Botanical Garden, and that was really a very great learning experience. I don't know if any of you have ever been there. I'd love to go with you, although I couldn't give you a tour because I'm not up to date on exactly what's blooming where, but I still kind of understand what it's about. But finally I got tired of docenting there because the drive was so long. And I have been a docent at the Conservatory of Flowers, which is that's the glass house in Golden Gate Park, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And it is open now. There are no tours. I think they're just a tour implies that you've got to have people close together, and that's a kind of a very close place anyway. So they haven't had tours, but it's open and it's beautifully taken care of. And
Sally, you taught in the San Francisco school district, you said, right?
no, I didn't.
Oh, I thought you said when you came
No.
back out here. Oh, okay. I missed
No,
that.
it's always been Marin,
Oh, all right.
ever since 1976.
76. Oh, well, okay.
And where in Marin?
What
Where
school,
in
Sally?
Marin?
Pardon me?
Where in Marin?
We live in Tiburon. Not
No,
far
but what
from
schools did you teach at? Is that the
Oh, well, what happened was that I started as a volunteer in the Reed Union, that's in Tiburon School, because they had lost their music program, and somebody said and we did, all the mothers volunteered. That was very much a part of the education there.
Yeah.
And so a note came home with the children, hip pocket mail, they used to call it, asking for somebody who would come and sing with kids. So I did that, and I found that doing it with the piano was hard for me. I wasn't that good a pianist that I could, play and teach and sing and do everything else. So I started playing with the guitar, and that worked much better, and it was fun. And so then I I got hired. The school board wanted to, I don't know, say they had a music program, and they didn't pay me much. And I said I would rather do it as a volunteer. No, we have to have a program. So I did do it there. And then I actually moved to San Rafael. And some of you may remember Hugo Rinaldi, who was he was sort of Mr. Music of San Rafael. And he was very involved with the Youth Symphony. And he also ran the school program. And so they had a slightly better program there. So I taught there for a few years. And it was classroom music. And I had been a classroom teacher, and I was amazed at how much harder it was to be the itinerant teacher who, went from classroom to classroom and had to adjust to every 30 minutes to a different group of students. I mean, it was a challenge. And I didn't think I always succeeded, but sometimes they did. And when we had to do a performance, they always came through. The kids loved performing, and all the pranks and things they would pull in a classroom, they would not pull on the stage with their parents out there.
Well, Sally, that's great. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you doing this for us. And but I think we should wrap up for tonight. Thanks everybody for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all
Thank
for
you,
coming.
Jim. Thank you, Sally.
Next time is going to be Jim Finn, a month from now, the third Thursday of January. So tune in then. We'll see you again. Thanks.
Good. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jim, for
Bye.
organizing this.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Sally.
Thanks again, Sally.
You